So to shift back to legalisms, though, which is a little more comfortable for me and everyone else in the room, I'm sure, I just wanted to bring to your attention, because, of course, I am the crusader, and I don't use that word in that sense. Let me say another way. Let me start again. I am the person who goes out there and fights for the right to counsel, because I think it's so important. It's what gets in the way of torture, first of all. If there's a lawyer in the way, observing, objecting, the torture doesn't seem to happen as often. However, I just want to bring to your attention the case of Moussaoui. You know, he is supposedly the 20th person that was recruited to fly on 9/11. He was arrested out in Minnesota. And the story of his trial is a very muddled one, in my mind, at least, even reading the papers and trying to keep up with it. He was tried in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is the black hole of the court system. I mean, everybody gets convicted. That's where they're holding Sami El-Arian, a Palestinian who was acquitted, made a deal with the government not to have to testify again, and has been subpoenaed 3 times to a grand jury and is now in a hunger strike where he was just recently hospitalized up again. The Eastern District of Virginia. Moussaoui was tried there in front of a Judge Brinkema. But the important thing is the appeal he has filed. He eventually took a plea and is doing jail time, but the plea that he took, they did not foreclose an appeal. And in this appeal, he has raised the fact of his right to counsel on 2 grounds. The first of them being that counsel had to be approved by the federal government. He couldn't have called Lynne Stewart, he couldn't have called Bill Kunstler, he couldn't have called Michael Smith, because we probably never would have passed the security clearances that the government requires for that kind of case. And if there is, supposedly the law says there's no, choice has to be unfettered. If you want the worst lawyer or the best lawyer to represent you, that's choice, and that's what you're entitled to have. This, of course, has a spillover to my case, because, of course, those regulations which they set up for me and my client, that's also the government deciding how you represent a client. And I don't have to tell people in this room how dangerous that is, because they're then on both sides of the table in a courtroom. They're not only prosecuting, but they're telling the defense how they defend, what to defend, and when to defend it. But even more than that, after the lawyers were assigned to him, the lawyers that had passed the security clearance, those lawyers were not permitted to tell him what was in these secure papers. They were not sharing this with him. They were precluded from sharing it. So there is this situation. This is so, you say surreal about the world in which we live, but it's not surreal. It's real. This is really happening. And in this situation, they believed that he should go to trial, that the evidence against him was not good enough to keep him from, that he had a chance to win at trial. But when he said to them, well, what is this evidence? They were not permitted to tell him. They were not permitted to share with the client, the person whose life is in the dock. They were not permitted to share that with him. So on both these grounds, the right to counsel, the Sixth Amendment, the great right to counsel, is once again constrained. I said a long time ago, in answer to a question, my case impacts on so many amendments. Michael Smith once said every single amendment is challenged by your case. But we see it's not just my case, and I'm not an isolated instance. No, they haven't rounded up the lawyers. They haven't thrown the judges off the benches like they did in Pakistan. But it's the incursions, it's the things that happen over and over. It is Moussaoui. Who could be a less sympathetic client in the minds of the public than Moussaoui? And yet, doesn't he have the right to have a lawyer who can tell him the truth? Doesn't he have the right to have a lawyer he chooses to have? Well, I guess the answer is no, and we'll hear what the appeals court does, but I'm no great believer in appeals courts, We shall have to wait and see, but it's important that we understand that these are the things that are at stake and have been at stake and will continue to be at stake. And I don't meet many of my comrades as lawyers who don't say to me, since your arrest, we don't practice law the same way. We recognize that someone could always be listening. Our clients recognize that. We can't be open. We can't strategize. We can't take all the possibilities and put them together. So the landscape has changed. And when we say the coming police state, we spoke recently at an NYU convocation, and the question was the coming police state, or are we too late already? And to some degree we are too late, but we've got to get out there. We've got to do this thing. And of course the war is the forefront, and this week coming, I hope you're all going to get out there and show some muscle, because if we don't start showing up in a really strong way, we're not having any mass demonstrations, but there's a million small ones, including a human chain from river to river on 14th Street, which I kind of love. But at any rate, we do have to get out there, and that's what I'm going to do. I can tell you that. I meet people and they say, oh, you're out of jail? And I say, well, I'm not only out, but I've never gone, and I hope I never will go. I just would close by saying the fight is a good fight. This is a good fight we're in. We have to fight, because if we don't, all will be lost. And none of us want that to happen. Thank you.